Just a few quick housekeeping items before we get started. The session is being recorded and we'll make sure all recordings are available as soon as possible. All participants have entered muted. Please remain on mute unless a speaker has asked you to unmute. If you have a technology issues, please select the chat icon and the Zoom control panel and send it to Carlene, and I'll do my best to assist you. And your speakers will let you know how they would like to answer any questions that you may have. And with that, I will now turn it over to Lisa Hensley to get us started.
Okay, good morning, everyone. We're going to talk about wealth building through housing today. As most of us know, homeownership is the primary way for families to build multi-generational wealth and achieve housing stability. Several decades of discriminatory housing policies and lending practices has resulted in disinvestment, wealth, and homeownership gaps impacting our communities of color. Economic uncertainties, along with the current homebuyer market, threatens to widen the racial homeownership and wealth gaps further. Through a variety of different perspectives, our panel will discuss the current homebuyer and affordable housing environment as it pertains to our communities of color. The panel will discuss housing market trends in some of our majority Black and Hispanic communities, the important programs and policies, the need to develop capacity of those already invested in the community, and opportunities to help increase investment. CHFA is a self-funded quasi-public agency, and our mission is to alleviate the shortage of housing for low and moderate income families and persons in Connecticut. CHFA achieves its mission by utilizing bonds and other state and federal resources to fund affordable housing programs and strengthen homeownership opportunities. Since its inception in 1969, CHFA has issued over 147,000 single-family mortgages, giving these families the opportunity to purchase their first home. CHFA's homeownership programs outperform the home purchase mortgage industry in Connecticut as a whole. This year, about 42% of CHFA mortgages have been made to minority borrowers, continuing a steady trend upward of minority home buyers using a CHFA mortgage product since 2018. We believe families and communities can successfully build wealth through our homeownership programs. A recent report from CoreLogic estimated the average Connecticut homeowner gained some $54,000 in equity during the past year. CHFA estimates that its first-time homebuyers have built roughly $100,000 in equity since 2013. To help alleviate potential homebuyers' inability to qualify or cover the down payment and closing costs required to purchase their first home, CHFA offers below-market fixed rate interest rates, along with down payment assistance programs to cover the gap to allow borrowers to purchase with no money out of pocket. Visit chfa.org for information on all of our programs. And now I will give the stage to Jonathan Hopkins to share his research on the barriers and limitations posed to homeowners.
Great, thank you, Lisa. I appreciate it. I also like to thank Carlene for all the help behind the scenes and coordinating. My name is Jonathan Hopkins. I'll try to present for about 10 or 15 minutes or so on some research that's related to homeownership in Connecticut. This is based on research that I began back in 2017 in graduate school and have continued to work on since then. I'm currently working with the Northwalk Housing Corporation, which is a nonprofit affordable housing development organization based out of Norwalk, Connecticut. So this presentation will briefly discuss benefits of, barriers to, and also opportunities for homeownership in Connecticut. And I look forward to seeing how this research intersects with some of the other experiences of the rest of the panel, and hopefully there'll be a little bit of time for discussion towards the end of the session. I'd also like to thank everyone for joining. Hopefully there's some interesting information shared here that will be helpful to people. So just briefly, some benefits to homeownership, as we've heard earlier today, and as many people are probably familiar with, some of the common benefits of owning one's own home that are often cited include seeing homeownership as a more affordable housing alternative to renting in many instances. It can also be an opportunity to build wealth. It can be a more stable long-term living arrangement. It can be a source of funding through equity and value that can be used for things like home improvements, education, emergency expenses, and other household expenses and things like that. There are many other benefits that I'm sure many people are familiar with as well, but I just wanted to give a little baseline there. Some contemporary barriers to homeownership, and again, this is not an exhaustive list, but some of those barriers include low wages and household incomes. That can be a barrier to people getting a mortgage-backed loan to purchase a home. Another barrier can be insufficient savings, which normally is used for something like a down payment or closing costs when someone's buying a home. But if you have insufficient savings, that can be another barrier. Poor or no credit history, limits to some of the state and federal home buying assistance programs. Oftentimes, many state or federal assistance programs only provide partial grants and loans. For many reasons, that's to limit some of their risks. But that can serve as somewhat of a barrier as well. High personal debt can be another one. High overall housing costs in the market. Competition with professional real estate investors for housing, that can be a barrier if you're trying to outcompete someone that's paying with cash or someone that intends to rent the property. That can increase the value and make it harder for a homeowner to purchase a house. Then lastly, there's ongoing maintenance and repair costs associated with housing over the lifetime that someone would live in the housing that can be a barrier as well. And again, it's not an exhaustive list, but gives kind of an idea of what some of the things people can be struggling with when it comes to homeownership. And another kind of delving a little bit deeper into some of those barriers, there's the number of housing households that are housing cost burdened, the number of severely burdened households. Right now is around 12% of all households in Connecticut are spending more than 50% of their household income on housing costs. An additional 24% statewide are paying at least 30% of their income towards housing costs. So just housing is expensive, and incomes are, for many households, not enough to cover the housing costs. And just looking at those severely housing cost burden households that are spending more than 50% of their income, looking at how that's distributed between households that identify as white, Black, or Latino. So 11% overall for white households in the state, 19% for Black households, and 18% for Latino households. And looking at some of the costs on the cost side of providing housing, just a couple of years ago, providing one unit of housing for a developer might cost $250,000. Currently, we're seeing $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 per unit for developers to make a new unit available on the market. And for subsidized housing, that per unit cost can be a little bit more if you're including some of the infrastructure that needs to support the housing development, or some of the kind of administrative costs of overseeing affordable housing can bring that per unit cost up a little bit more. So hundreds of thousands of dollars, per unit to make available on the market. That translates often into thousands of dollars per month in rent, or thousands of dollars per month in loan payments if you have a mortgage on the house, and insurance and taxes. So cost-burdened households often come up short of being able to afford, the thousands of dollars per month that it takes to support that housing. And so, the combination of high costs and low incomes produces a significant gap between what many households can afford to pay for the housing and then the cost of providing that housing. Now, there is some hope, I believe. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the opportunities for homeownership that hopefully we'll see in Connecticut. And it's basically focused on three main buckets. One of those is there's a strong rental market, which could provide an opportunity for homeownership. There's land use policy across the state that will hopefully support some homeownership opportunities, and there are potentially new funding sources that will support homeownership. So I'll go into each one of those in a little bit more detail. And so the demand for rental housing, while it can encourage professional real estate investors to purchase housing and use it for rental, driving up costs and making it more competitive for home buyers. The demand for rental housing can also potentially be an opportunity for homeowners who need to raise their household income in order to afford housing costs if they themselves become an owner-occupant landlord and rent out 1 or 2 or potentially 3 units in a house that they live in as a way to supplement their income and help pay off a mortgage. And so you see rental demand for people who can afford to and who prefer to rent. And some of those populations include young professionals, recent college graduates, some empty nesters. They're potentially a source of rental income for owner occupants. And then there's also demand for people who qualify for and who are lucky enough to receive rental assistance through either housing choice vouchers, the Connecticut Rental Assistance Payment Program, or some other assistance programs that can potentially be another source of income for owner-occupant landlords. And then as far as land use policy, that offers existing and potentially new ways of providing additional housing to meet that market demand. So one stat that I found interesting is that only about 2% of Connecticut housing units are considered overcrowded. And the metric for measuring overcrowdedness is if more than one person resides per room in a housing unit. And so rooms can include living space and bedrooms. So if there's more than one person per room, that's considered overcrowded, which means that there's potentially hundreds of thousands of under-occupied housing units throughout Connecticut, between 1 and 4 unit residential properties across the state. So I think there's an opportunity there for potentially home sharing or just occupying existing housing more densely. And then there's the recent statewide legislation that allows ADUs to be created on many single family properties throughout the state. That's another opportunity to create housing that owners can rent out and supplement their income and help cover some of the costs of home ownership. In addition to that, there's existing kind of traditional sources of funding, but there's also new sources of funding that may help support home ownership. Again, there's traditional bank finance with long-term low-interest loans of mortgage-backed loans that you see, home improvement loans, and this may be appropriate in some instances, but can be limited, historically and currently. Some of those barriers that I talked about earlier, people with low credit or low savings or low incomes, it can be difficult to get traditional bank financing. Then there's also state and federal homeownership programs. For instance, the community development block grants can be used for providing grants or no interest or low interest loans to help home buyers cover down payment costs, closing costs, other home buying expenses. But even that program, it's limited. They won't cover 100% of down payment or closing costs. There's almost always a gap that the home buyer will need to provide in cash through savings or other sources. And so that's where potentially new funding sources come in handy. And so some of the demand we've seen for housing in some of the state's cities like Stanford, Norwalk, New Haven, some other places, some of that kind of market rate development is creating opportunities for implementing development impact fees, or what a lot of communities are looking at is inclusionary zoning. And that could potentially be a source of both affordable housing or payment in lieu of into affordable housing funds that are locally managed. So what you'll see in some cities is they're looking to create a fund that's where developers don't want to provide units in their development. They can pay into an affordable housing fund, and that can be used potentially for things like homeownership and home buying assistance for down payments, closing costs. It can be used for home improvements, helping people build ADUs or do home sharing in their property. Can help do home improvement training to help people be better at repairing and maintaining their own house, which can provide significant cost savings. Or they can be used for gap financing for affordable housing development. So I think those are some of the opportunities that I'm hopeful about in the housing market. I mean, we'll need to monitor what happens with interest rates, seeing what happens with the economy. Hopefully, we're not headed towards a recession anytime soon. But so some of this is dependent on kind of what happens in the housing market. But I'm hopeful that some of these opportunities will help close that gap between household incomes and housing costs, and help inform some programs, services, funds that can be used to support homeownership moving forward. So I look forward to maybe a year or two from now seeing if any organizations or municipalities are taking advantage of some of these opportunities and what their the outcomes they're seeing. But I'm hoping that we can discuss this a little bit more towards the end of the session, and I look forward to seeing what the other panelists have to contribute, and happy to respond to any questions towards the end. But thanks again for your time, and I'll turn it over now to Mr. Harris, I believe.
Hello.
We can hear you, Mr.
We can
Harris.
Oh, I'm having an issue here. Oh, yeah.
Can you hear us, Steve?
I can hear you, yes.
Great, and we can hear you too, so you're all set.
Okay, I can't see it, so I'll just talk. Again, my name is Steve Harris. I am a Hartford resident. I've lived on the street that I'm currently on, Cleveland Avenue in Hartford, for over 70 years. One of the things that I've come to realize is that when we talk about generational wealth, particularly in brown and black neighborhoods, owning a home starts and creates that generational wealth that we talk about, we hear people talking about today. One of the things that concern me is that as a homeowner, I own a 3-family, and everyone in that 3-family is a relative. And what worries me is that, and I heard the previous speaker speak on this, is every month, it seems like over the last year or so, I've received calls from real estate investors out of the clear blue asking if I'm interested in selling my property. That worries me because, again, the block that I live on, I'm starting to see for sale signs. It has been, again, I said I've lived here all my life on this block. My family was the first Black family to move on this street, and we were the first Black family for a while. Most of my neighbors were Irish, Italian, Jewish, which was a great experience for me growing up because I learned about different ethnicities, different religions. I left Hartford and I left my home once I graduated from high school and went into the military and went off to war. I came back to Cleveland Avenue in 1968, fresh from the jungles of Vietnam, not knowing that, well, let me just say 4 weeks prior to that, Martin Luther King was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, and we all know what happened because of that. Set off rioting all over the United States. Hartford was one of those cities that experienced that rioting. All the while I served in Vietnam that year in the jungle, I couldn't wait to get back home to Hartford, back to sanctuary, as I called it. When I was picked up on my return to Hartford from the airport by my family, I didn't know what was going on in Hartford. I was just glad to be on my way home. And I was told prior, once I got picked up, that Hartford had been rioting since Dr. King had been assassinated. When I got home on that fateful day in May, after we made our way through police barricades and I saw the smoke and the devastation that had taken place not only on my surrounding blocks, storefronts, stores, businesses, small businesses, one of the things I came to realize that Hartford had become segregated. I went from an integrated neighborhood to what was left of my neighborhood, an all Black and brown neighborhood. Many of the homes on Cleveland Avenue weren't touched because the residents kind of protected their own properties. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that from 1968 until today, there's been this, in my humble opinion, this disinvestment in communities like mine, where housing is no longer a reachable dream to most folk. Had it not been for Habitat for Humanity, and as I said, I've lived on this block all my life, I'm still on this block, there would have been no new housing of any kind on Cleveland Avenue. So big shout out to Habitat. Now we have the land bank, which is into that fray. The great American dream of owning a home in places, in neighborhoods, in cities like mine is becoming almost non-achievable for most folks that live here. Again, you know, we have real estate speculators trying to buy up homes like mine, 3 families, 6 families. The first thing they do is, in many cases, is raise rents that force folks out of neighborhoods like mine. We have to, when I say we, I'm talking about citizens, activists, housing advocates. We have to figure out a way that we can get folks, again, excited about owning a home, being able to afford a home, and having help obtaining homes. My street abuts a housing development, which at one point was one of the most notorious housing developments in the state, Stowe Village. Typical project housing, big block, brick buildings, families living on top of each other, common front, what little front yard you had was a common front yard. Through vision of visionaries like John Wardlow, who became executive director of the Hartford Housing Authority back when, changed that, knocked down those old block shaped brick buildings and turned into what now looks like individual condos. Folks have lawn, folks have backyards, folks have clean streets. Folks take pride in what they see. And what it's done is it's helped enhance my neighborhood because we abut what used to be Stowe Village, the old Stowe Village, and now the new Stowe Village. And I see the difference as a resident of Cleveland Avenue. And I guess my message to you folks who are involved in housing is that we have to find a way of getting more people, when I say people, particularly young people, avenues to afford property. And again, the first property should be a home. I'm third generation in this house that I'm in now. I've already, it's in my will that when I finally leave here, this is going to go to my daughters. I've already made very clear to them that this home, this 3-family house, has to stay in the family. Because if there's one thing that I'm sure of, is that everyone should have a place to live. Everyone should have a place to live, an affordable, clean, safe place to live. Another point I like to make about housing in neighborhoods like mine, at one point, what I stopped seeing was children. I stopped seeing children. Well, there was one or two, but it became apparent that the folks on my street were aging out. Their children were grown and had moved on. And it was a strange feeling to live on a street where you didn't, or you very rarely saw children. Again, I have to give a big shout out to Habitat, because when they built those Habitat homes on Cleveland Avenue, it brought children back to the street, which brought life back to the street. So little things that I think we may take for granted, I think we have to realize are very, very important in communities as a whole. In communities as a whole. And speaking for me, a little background about myself. I'm a retired Hartford fire captain. I served 27 years in the Hartford Fire Department and retired, then became a Connecticut State Marshal. Did 15 years marshaling. I belong to numerous boards. And the reason I point that out is because I get asked even today, why are you still on Cleveland Avenue? And I think people take for granted that you live where you live because you want to live there, not because you have to live there or you're stuck there, but because you genuinely want to live there. And that's the way I feel about Cleveland Avenue. And I think if you talk to most Hartfordites that are still here, they're still here for the same reason for most part, because this is our homes. And again, it's when you live amongst people who aren't getting their fair share, when you live amongst people who kind of lost hope in government and agencies because they don't see their wrongs being righted. And right now in Hartford, there's a big move by tenants to once again organize so they can get rid of things like lead paint in their apartments. That's a government function that should be taking care of stuff like that. Tenants shouldn't have to organize to get the attention to have to be able to live in a safe housing unit. But again, these are times that are unusual, to say the least, for me anyway. And the reason I pointed out about my experience in Hartford and what I've done is because people to this day ask me, why are you still on Cleveland Avenue? And my answer is always the same. It's because this is where I want to be. And I'm a firm believer in that those of us that can make a change, if we left, who would be left to make the change? And I don't see myself as a martyr. I just see myself as a guy growing up in Hartford on the same block. And again, I encourage you housing advocates to try to figure out a way to make owning a home not just a dream, but a reality, because that's what's going to save most of our cities, and particularly our inner cities. That's pretty much it for me. Anybody have any questions for me? Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
And I don't mean to preach. It's just that again, like I said, I'm just very passionate about the city that I live in and my neighbors. And like I said, we have to do better. We absolutely have to do better.
Well,
I agree. I absolutely agree. And that's something I'm sure is a priority for all of us here on this call. And we'll let, we'll go ahead and move on to Arunan. And then at the end, hopefully we'll have another 7 to 10 minutes just to answer any particular questions. I know I have one or two. So we'll wait until then, and we can call on people for questions. Arunan, do you want to get started?
sure. Yeah, I'll start. And I just want to say I asked Steve if he would be on this panel because I think so often when we have these conversations, it's about the numbers and the holes that need to be plugged, and it's so easy to lose sight of what a huge impact housing makes on people and on communities, especially communities here in places like Hartford. And Steve is somebody who is constantly a reminder to me of why I do what we're doing at the land bank, and so much of the model of what we've done at the land bank. Steve's on our board as well, and has been influenced by Steve. But look, Hartford is a city with, as I'm sure most people on this call know, the lowest home ownership rate in the state of Connecticut. It's got a 24% home ownership rate, and in the neighborhood where Steve lives, in the neighborhood where I live, it's actually less than that. You think about living in a neighborhood where 80 to 90% of your neighbors, as is true in both of our neighborhoods, are paying rent every single month, and those dollars are going out the door. And to just give you some context, in neighboring West Hartford, they've got a 71% home ownership rate. Glastonbury's got an 80% home ownership rate. When you think about 80 to 90% of residents in a neighborhood paying rent, and paying rent that continues to increase year after year, especially in the last few years. Right now, new apartments going up, not even apartments in good condition, but apartments that are available for rent on Cape and Ave and on Enfield Street, in places in the north end of Hartford, are going for $1,400 to $1,600 a month, which is more than I pay for my mortgage on this beautiful house I live in with my wife and 5 kids. So we are allowing residents to pay dollars out of their pocket. And in neighborhoods, especially in the north end of Hartford, where there's a lot of disinvestment, close to half, in fact, many neighborhoods, more than half of the properties are owned by investors who live outside of the state of Connecticut. And so poor communities in Hartford are shipping millions of dollars every month out of our state, dollars that could be spent here in Hartford that could economically empower residents in Hartford. And I always ask myself the question, why would somebody come from New York or New Jersey or Florida or California or Texas to little old Hartford, Connecticut to buy a property? And it's because it's a good investment. Their housing is a good investment, and we have not made the steps to allow for that investment to be made in our own people, the people who live in communities in Hartford, who have all the opportunity, all the potential in the world, and are just asking to have the same types of communities, the same types of opportunities, and a belief and imagination in what the residents of cities like Hartford and New Haven and Bridgeport could do if they had the same economic basis, if they have the same economic stability and home ownership that other communities have. Folks on this call are all very well aware of the studies that link home ownership to lack of home ownership to increased crime, to blight, obviously, to implications in the educational system and in schools. We pay for the lack of home ownership in cities like Hartford through the nose. I mean, we pay so much for the fact that Hartford communities, Hartford families don't have that economic foundation of ownership within their city in so many different ways. And we at the land bank really feel like the lack of ownership, we were created by the city to deal with blight in our city. And we view blight as symptomatic of a larger lack of ownership in our city. And we think that that lack of homeownership is such an urgent issue in Hartford, because it is so much easier right now for an investor from out of state to purchase a property here in Hartford than for someone who wants to own a home here in Hartford. And if you don't believe me, after this conference, go on Zillow for a little bit and look around the north end of Hartford and look around the south end of Hartford and try to find a single house that is teed up for homeownership, that is priced for homeownership in any of our neighborhoods outside of the West End. It's really, really difficult to do. And the biggest issue we have, and every community is a little different, every city is a little different. The biggest issue we have in Hartford is not demand for homeownership right now, it's supply of homeownership. We just do not have enough units of homeownership in our city. And I think part of that is the economics are difficult because it costs more to redevelop, as many of you know, a property than you can sell it to a homeowner for. But if we don't step in and deal with those dollars, we are going to pay for that lack of homeownership in so many different ways in our community. And so at the land bank, we have committed to finding ways to fund that those dollars for homeownership, those subsidies, to allow homeownership to exist, and to fund those without deed restrictions. You know, one of the issues that I think has contributed to the lack of investment in cities like Hartford are the deed restrictions that come with so many of the housing funding dollars. And again, if you take Steve's neighborhood, for example, and my neighborhood, both of our neighborhoods, you find more than 50% of the housing units are deed restricted, income restricted, low income housing units. And what that says to those communities, first of all, when you get to that saturation of deed restricted units, is this is the place where we are going to house poor people for the next X amount of years. And it really makes it difficult to build thriving middle-class communities in so many of our neighborhoods in Hartford. And so the land bank is committed to finding our dollars through different means to fund those homeownership subsidies that will allow homeownership to exist in our city, in our neighborhoods. Because what we have found is that when we build a house that is meant for ownership, we don't have folks coming in from places like Greenwich and Glastonbury to live in the north end of Hartford. It is Hartford residents who are going to take advantage of those opportunities. And with or without income restrictions, it's going to target those populations. And the biggest issue we have is not the restrictions on income. It is the quantity of home ownership opportunities that exist in our city. The second piece of our model is we are really committed to finding local developers who can do that work of redeveloping these houses, these vacant and blighted properties, and creating home ownership. Because if we are going to spend millions of dollars, we view it as taking two bites at the apple, allowing for a local resident to redevelop that home ownership, redevelop that property, allows them to build wealth and build a business off of the redevelopment. And then if we can sell any property we get that's 3 units and below, we would like to tee up for home ownership. We're trying to tee up for home ownership. Then it allows a family to stay in there and continue to build wealth for their family after that. And so we created this developer cohort training program at the land bank. We can talk a little bit about it if people are interested, but we are working to train Hartford residents to be able to take on properties that are vacant, blighted, and redevelop them on their own. We don't do that as much as a nonprofit. We are leaning on local residents and trying to build a pipeline of local residents who can do that work. And then to either sell it if it's a home ownership project, or if it's a larger apartment complex, to own it here. Because as many slumlords as we have in the city of Hartford, I don't know any that live in the city of Hartford. We would like to get more people, even with the rental units, who own those, who live right here in the city, who care about the city, who are invested in the city, and who care about the residents in this city. And we created that cohort program. I haven't been at the land bank all that long, but we created that program right after I came on. I think we launched it about 2 months or 3 months after I got to the land bank. And it was a little bit of, I did it based on intuition of what I thought we could be doing as a land bank, and weren't sure how successful it would be the first year. But we put out an application, and we had almost 300 Hartford residents apply to be in the first cohort. 94% of them were residents of color, 72% of the applicants were from the north end of Hartford. And we think that there's a tremendous opportunity to continue to grow the pipeline of local developers here in the city of Hartford who could redevelop these properties, who could build wealth of these properties, and who can help us make a massive change in the level of home ownership and ownership generally in our city, and start turning over these properties to be owned by Hartford residents, to build wealth for Hartford residents, and to economically empower communities from the ground up, to really allow residents themselves to be able to build the community that they have dreamed of and hoped of, home by home. And that's our goal as a land bank. So it's a pleasure to be here with all of you, and I'm happy, along with the other presenters, I'm sure, to take questions.
Great, thank you. I don't know, I can't see everyone. So if you want to raise your hand if you have any questions. I know I do have a question. When I heard the statement that the subsidies don't always cover 100% of what is needed, and I think that was Jonathan talked about, and as from CHFA, we have seen a lot of layering of assistance, and I'm not sure if that's something that maybe we need to educate people on. And I don't know if Jonathan, if you have a thought on that, or if that's something that has been explored.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's, affordable housing often requires layering of different funding sources. And so one of the things I tried to highlight was the potential opportunity for some of those new funding sources. You have several communities throughout the state that are creating affordable housing funds. Hopefully there are more opportunities for more communities to create those funds. And that's potentially a local source of funding that can be used kind of as a gap or match, or to close some of the those funding gaps that we see for things like down payment assistance, closing costs related to home ownership. But I'm sure there are other opportunities at the state and federal level as well to layer different funding sources to support all kinds of affordable housing, including home ownership.
Right. Yeah, at CHFA, we recently started allowing all of that layering, and to allow people to borrow less. Give more towards down payment, make it more affordable. And we've seen as many as 5 different sources of layering on one transaction. So I think maybe we need to just get more information out about those opportunities as well. I think sometimes people think, okay, I don't want to qualify for this because I'm only going to get 3%. And I can't qualify. But when you layer all of that, it makes a huge difference. And there are a lot of people with in that lower income level that have been able to purchase homes recently. Well, at least before the interest rates went up, we're going to have to take that into consideration as well. Thank you. Okay, so we do have a question. Curious as to what role housing choice vouchers could play in homeownership opportunities. And that's something that's been a discussion at CHFA as well. I don't know if others have an opinion or have any kind of input to give here, but housing choice vouchers can be used to purchase a home. So if you're receiving a certain amount, we will use that basically to offset the mortgage payment for qualifying purposes. So you can purchase a home using a housing choice voucher.
And I'll just quickly mention that you could also rent out, if you're buying a small multifamily property, a 2 or 3 family, you could potentially rent out units to someone who's receiving a housing choice voucher, and that will provide you a decent income to help you afford home ownership.
And where is that information writing about the housing choice vouchers? I know that Fannie and Freddie have their, and FHA, they all have it in their guidelines as to how that income can be treated. And but I don't know where I would have to look into where we would find the information on how to obtain those vouchers for purchase. And I think a lot of that is based on each locality. So, but we can certainly get information about that and disseminate it. Any more? Sustaining a home. Okay, so the question was, how are we helping people not only with buying a home, but helping them sustain it? And one of the biggest things that we have found that is most valuable, in my opinion, for home purchasing is homebuyer education classes. We require it on our programs, and there's plenty more other than there's so many different educational courses you can take relating to homeownership, like budgeting and it's one-on-one counseling with setting up budgets and really preparing you, helping prepare your credit, helping prepare your finances, looking at what can you afford and what would work for you. We want to make sure that every homeowner knows what they can expect and what they need to prepare for as homeowners. I think a lot of people don't think about the little things that might happen that really can be a big thing when you have limited income and limited resources.
Now, I'm kind of curious if some of the services that the Hartford Land Bank is providing to help people become developers, would some of that training and education also include helping someone kind of maintain a house and kind of improve a house or repair? Would that be included in some of those education and training services?
I would need to look into that. I know that there are some for people who want to purchase a multi-family unit and how to handle rent and expectations there. I'm not positive of all of the programs that that the housing counseling agencies offer, but I can certainly send a link for us to find more about that.
Yeah, we at the land bank are really focused on properties that come in through the land bank from the city, and so we continue to work with our developers after they've gotten the properties and mentor them through that process. And we've also created, working with the Hartford Community Loan Fund, some specific lines of capital for our developers, for people who are already in existing homes. And I think what Steve pointed out was a really important point, which is that I think Hartford is in the danger of moving in the wrong direction on home ownership, because we have a large population, places like Cleveland Ave in numerous streets of Blue Hills that is aging out. And Steve will tell you, gets a call once a week from somebody with an offer to purchase their home. And so, being able to find the capital to fix up those properties and keep homeowners in their homes is difficult to do, and it's certainly not something that I'm aware of. Aside from Habitat has some programs specifically for folks with disabilities and for veterans. There's Rebuilding Hartford, and I know there's the Rebuilding in other communities, Manchester and elsewhere, that does some of that work, but in a larger scale way, I'm not sure that there is really anywhere near the amount of response that's needed given the kind of housing stock we have in here in Hartford.
I'm not sure if anyone is in a position to answer this next question. It says, in the past, Habitat for Humanity has not rehabbed homes which could be used for rental purposes, e.g., a 2-unit home where one is owner occupied and one unit is owner occupied and the other unit they could rent to help of course, pay that mortgage. Does anyone know if that's changed, or is that still a policy?
I don't know that specifically, and I couldn't speak for Habitat, but I'll say the land bank is certainly planning to put a number of 2 and 3 units on the market in the coming year for homeownership specifically.
I can. This is Patrick McKenna. I work with the North Hartford Partnership. Habitat affiliates are different all around the state, but the Hartford area Habitat for Humanity does provide duplexes that a homeowner can rent out. Often it's to a relative, as is the case in Steve's situation. So it's not across the board for every Habitat affiliate, but in Hartford, the Hartford area Habitat does do that, have that policy.
Great. Good to know. And I don't know if you all can see the chat, but there is lots of development, but all rental. And it says, what can municipalities do to incentivize development of condo ownership units? Land prices are high. There's a high demand for all housing. Any ideas on what can be done for that?
And I'm not so sure how much local governments want to try to influence the market. I think that you're just kind of seeing what market demand there is for rental right now. That's why so much of new construction is rental. But I would just say one of the points I brought up in my presentation was a lot of existing housing is under occupied. So I'm potentially interested in seeing how existing housing can be more densely occupied, and that might provide opportunities for home ownership. But again, condos is just it's not what we're seeing on the demand side and developers providing. So I'm not sure what sort of incentives or subsidies places could or should provide to encourage condo development.
But I do know that you did mention that, maybe adding the accessory dwelling units is a way to assist with that type of thing as well. So maybe purchasing a single unit, but being able to convert it or add on to add that accessory dwelling unit, because we're under there, it's under, what did you call it? It's less people residing in the property that could be. So that might be another thing to look into. And I know in the past, I think CHFA offered a program for building affordable dwelling units, but I think we need to revisit it and see how it could help better. It could do a better job. So the program really hasn't been utilized. I don't even know that it's worth it if we even offer it right now, but we are going to be looking at that as well.
Yeah, I would just add on what can municipalities do. I think the city of Hartford is doing it by trying to take some of these properties that would otherwise be rental units and giving them to the land bank and taking them out of that cycle of continuing to be put up as rental units, and we need the dollars to make homeownership a possibility on these properties. And but I think the first step is making concerted effort to go after, especially the vacant and blighted properties, the properties in poor condition that aren't being kept up, that are owned as rental units, and foreclosing on them and turning them over to something like a land bank with the intention of creating home ownership.
I know there's still more questions, but we are out of time. We'll try to keep that keep this list and get some additional information out to all of our to everyone that has attended. We appreciate that, and I'm going to turn it back over to Carlene if she could take over.
Thank you so much to you, Lisa, Rune, and Jonathan, and Steve for joining us today, and for everyone who's here with us listening to some of the resources that's available to providing homeownership opportunities. So the next session, racial residential segregation and housing opportunity, starts right now. So we hope to see you there. Thanks again, and have a good afternoon, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.